I went no contact with my brother-in-law. He told me this when I was at my lowest and now. My world shattered the day my husband died. But it was my brother-in-law's venomous words that buried me alive. You're nothing without him, he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt as I sat, hollowed out, in my grief-soaked living room. I'll never forget the smug tilt of his head, as if my pain was his victory. Lila Parker was no stranger to loss, but nothing prepared her for the void left by Ethan's sudden death in a car accident. At 34, she was a widow, grappling with a mortgage, a toddler, and a heart that felt like it had been carved out with a dull knife. Her sister-in-law, Mara, was her lifeline, offering casseroles and late-night talks. But Mara's husband, Greg, was a different story. Greg, with his polished suits and perpetual smirk, always carried an air of superiority, like he was judging the room just by standing in it. Lila tolerated him for Mara's sake, but his presence grated, a constant reminder of her own fragility. In the weeks after Ethan's death, Lila's life unraveled. Bills piled up. Her job as a freelance graphic designer dried up under the weight of her grief, and her daughter, Sophie, cried for a father who'd never come home. Lila was at her lowest, barely eating, her eyes permanently red from tears. Mara insisted Greg help, claiming he had connections that could get Lila back on her feet. Reluctantly, Lila agreed to meet him, hoping for a lead on a job or even just a kind word. The meeting was set for a rainy Tuesday evening at Lila's small, cluttered home. Sophie was asleep upstairs, and the air smelled of stale coffee and unwashed dishes. Greg arrived, his expensive cologne clashing with the room's despair. Lila, in sweatpants and a faded hoodie, felt small under his gaze. She poured him coffee, her hands trembling, and explained her situation, the overdue bills, the empty fridge, the fear that she'd lose the house. I just need a little help, she said, voice cracking. Anything. Greg leaned back, swirling his coffee like it was fine wine. Lila. Let's be real, he said, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. You were never the breadwinner. Ethan carried you, and now you're floundering because you're nothing without him. The words landed like a punch, stealing her breath. She stared, waiting for him to laugh, to say it was a joke, but his eyes were cold, his smirk triumphant. You should have planned better, he continued. Mara's been carrying you too, hasn't she? It's pathetic. Lila's shock turned to rage, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Get out, she whispered, but Greg didn't move. Instead, he doubled down. You're a burden. Lila, Mara's too nice to say it, but you're dragging her down with you? Sell the house, get a grip, or you'll lose Sophie too. The mention of her daughter was a line crossed, a knife twisted in her heart. She stood, shaking, and pointed to the door. Leave. Now. Greg shrugged, as if her pain was irrelevant, and sauntered out, leaving her in a room that felt smaller, darker, colder. That night, Lila made a vow she'd cut Greg out of her life. No more family dinners, no more fake smiles. She blocked his number, told Mara she couldn't be around him, and braced for the fallout. Mara was torn, defending Greg's tough love, but begging Lila to reconsider. He's family, Mara said, tears in her eyes. But Lila couldn't unhear his words. They echoed in her nightmares, fueling a fire she didn't know she had. The months that followed were a blur of survival. Lila took on odd jobs, dog walking, tutoring, anything to keep the lights on. Each paycheck was a small victory, but Greg's words haunted her, whispering she'd fail. The tension grew when Mara kept pushing for reconciliation. He didn't mean it, she'd say, but Lila saw through it. Greg hadn't apologized. He'd meant every word. The family dynamic fractured. Holiday gatherings became battlegrounds, with Greg's presence a constant provocation. At Thanksgiving, he cornered Lila in the kitchen, his voice low and mocking, still scraping by. Told you, you're in over your head. Lila's restraint snapped. She threw a glass of wine in his face, the red liquid dripping down his shocked expression as Mara gasped and Guess stared. "Stay away from me," Lila hissed, storming out. The incident became the talk of their small town. Mara, caught in the middle, distanced herself, and Lila felt the sting of losing her sister's support. But something shifted in her. Greg's cruelty had lit a spark. She enrolled in night classes, learning web design to boost her skills. She networked, hustled, and landed a contract with a local startup. Slowly, her bank account grew, and so did her confidence. Sophie's laughter returned, filling their home with light. Lila was rebuilding, proving Greg wrong with every step. But the real storm was brewing. Greg, a real estate agent, had been skimming deals, inflating prices, and pocketing the difference. His connections were a house of cards, built on lies and greed. Lila stumbled on the truth by accident, overhearing a client at a coffee shop rant about Greg's shady practices. Her heart raced. This was her chance. She dug deeper, contacting former clients, gathering evidence of his fraud. The more she uncovered, the uglier it got: forged documents, coerced signatures, families misled into bad deals. Greg's empire was crumbling, and Lila held the match. The confrontation came at a community event, a charity auction where Greg was playing the charming philanthropist. Lila, dressed in a sharp blazer she'd bought with her first big paycheck, stood up during his speech. The room fell silent as she held up a folder, her voice steady but blazing with purpose. "Greg Harper's been lying to you all," she said, tossing the folder onto the stage. It burst open, revealing emails, contracts, proof of his scams. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Greg's face drained of color, his smirk gone, replaced by panic. "You can't prove anything," he stammered, but the evidence was undeniable. Mara, in the audience, looked like she'd been slapped. Lila met her sister's eyes, a pang of guilt hitting her, but she pressed on. "You called me a burden," she said, her voice carrying over the stunned crowd. "But you're the one who's been stealing from families, from this community. You're done." The room erupted, some in outrage, others in whispers. Greg tried to flee, but security stopped him. The fallout was swift lawsuits, investigations, and a public shaming that stripped him of his reputation. Lila didn't revel in it. She wanted justice, not revenge. Mara came to her a week later, broken and apologetic. "I didn't know," she whispered, tears streaming. Lila hugged her, the rift between them beginning to heal. Greg faced charges, his career in ruins, his smugness replaced by desperation. Lila, meanwhile, thrived. Her design business took off, and she moved into a new home, one she'd earned herself. Sophie's bedroom was painted bright yellow, her favorite color, a symbol of their fresh start. Looking back, Lila realized Greg's words, cruel as they were, had pushed her to fight harder. She'd turned his venom into fuel, his doubt into determination. But the cost: losing family, carrying that pain, still lingered. She wondered if she'd done the right thing, exposing him so publicly, or if her anger had gone too far. What do you think? Was Lila right to go no contact and expose Greg? Or should she have handled it differently? Share your thoughts. End.